Amari Carter groaned as a cold zip tie tightened around her wrist. One of the two security officers yanked her up from seat 2A without a glance at the pain in her voice. "She can't breathe," Ayanna Carter shouted, her voice trembling with rage, her eyes bloodshot, and her own arms bound behind her. "She has anxiety. She needs her inhaler. It's in her bag." No one responded. No one paused. The first-class passengers either turned away or raised their phones to record. A few sighed. A few whispered that the girls should just follow instructions. But not a single person stood up to ask why two teenage girls were being dragged off like criminals. In the pale white light of the cabin, the Orion aircrew uniforms were crisp, their expressions cold. A flight attendant named Emily Briggs, who had overseen most of the situation, stood near the aisle with her arms crossed, face blank. A man in a gray suit seated in the row behind leaned over to his companion and whispered, "This is why they shouldn't be in this section." The silence was suffocating. Amari was pushed into the aisle, the zip tie biting into her wrists, blood pulsing against plastic as her face turned pale from an escalating panic attack. Ayanna was held back, unable to reach her sister, and a moment later, both were hauled away under the frozen gaze of leather-seated passengers sipping champagne that had yet to be finished. The question is simple. If you were the mother of those two girls, and you saw your daughters being dragged from their first-class seats, not because they didn't have tickets, but because someone thought they didn't look like they belonged, what would you do? 12 hours earlier, it was just before dawn in Phoenix. In a quiet neighborhood in the northern part of the city, twin sisters Ayanna and Amari Carter stood before a full-length mirror in their bedroom, adjusting their coats and double-checking essentials. "Do you think my hair looks okay?" Ayanna asked, gently smoothing the cornrows close to her scalp. "You look like someone who wouldn't even need a ticket to be let into first class," Amari replied. They burst into laughter. Despite their different personalities, Ayanna calm and analytical, Amari energetic and outspoken, they always understood each other without saying much. "Did you pack your inhaler?" Ayanna asked. "Yes, yes," Amari said, holding it up playfully. "I won't need it, but if Mom says bring it, I bring it." That's how they were raised. Meticulous, prepared, never take readiness for granted. They were the daughters of Serena Thompson, founder of NextRise Ventures, a multi-billion-dollar airport infrastructure conglomerate. But Serena always reminded them that status didn't shield them from prejudice. "You can walk in with the same credentials," she once told them, "but your skin color will always enter the room before your accomplishments can speak." That morning, Serena couldn't take them to the airport. She was finalizing a major acquisition involving coordination systems at 3 of the West Coast's busiest airports. But she'd already gone over everything the night before, and again right before they left. "Tickets, ID, medicine," she listed. "And remember, you don't need to prove you belong, but the world will try to make you." Ayanna smiled softly. "We're taking the right flight, sitting in the right seats, doing everything right. Nothing to be afraid of." Serena kissed them both on the forehead, her eyes holding a worry she didn't say aloud. At Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, the terminal traffic thickened with each minute. Amari and Ayanna breezed through security, well-dressed, organized, focused, and headed straight for Orion Air's first-class lounge. When they presented their digital tickets at the reception, the staff member looked them over and then up at the girls. The look wasn't rude, but it carried a flicker of surprise and doubt. "This is the first-class lounge," the staffer said, eyes still on the scan. "Yes, we know," Ayanna answered calmly. "Here are our tickets." After a moment of silence, the staffer nodded and pointed toward the seating area. No welcome, no smile. They stepped into the quiet, warmly lit space of the elite lounge. Adults in suits tapped on laptops. Spoons stirred espresso cups. No one looked at them directly, yet the sense of being watched hung in the air like smoke. Amari sat down and whispered, "Do you think they assume we work for the airport?" Ayanna chuckled. "They probably think we're lost." It was a joke, but it reflected a reality they knew too well, being in spaces where others didn't think they belonged. Flight Orion 178 to Charlotte was called for boarding. The twins stood and joined the priority lane. The gate agent scanned their phones mechanically, not even looking up. "Have a good flight," she mumbled, eyes on the next passenger. Amari looked at Ayanna as they walked through the jet bridge. Did you see that? Same look. Ayana nodded. Yeah, we got in, but they don't think we should have. Orion's first-class cabin was spacious, quiet, with elegant cream leather seats and soft overhead lighting. Amari took the window seat 2A. Ayana sat in 2B by the aisle. They stored their bags, fastened their seat belts, and texted their mom. Serena replied instantly, I'm proud of you. Call me when you land. They pulled out headphones, planning to watch movies for the 3-hour flight. Less than 10 minutes later, a silver-haired man in a tailored suit entered the cabin. He stopped at their row, frowning. Excuse me, I think you're in the wrong seats. Ayana looked up, composed. No, sir. These are our assigned seats, 2A and 2B. That's impossible, he snapped. I sit here every week. Clearly there's been a system error. Amari pulled up the digital boarding pass on her phone. Here you go. Our tickets. It shows the seats. But he didn't look. He turned and called for a flight attendant. Emily Briggs arrived with a look of special concern. What's going on, Mr. Langford? These young ladies are in my seats, he said firmly. I'm a platinum executive member. I've had these seats booked all year. Emily turned to the girls. Can I see your tickets, please? She stared at their phones for a long moment, brow furrowed. I'll need to call a supervisor to resolve this. Ayana exhaled. Her chest began to feel heavy, not because of a glitch, but because of Emily's eyes. The way she said resolve, as if they'd done something wrong. Amari gently squeezed her sister's hand. We're not in the wrong, right? No, Ayana said, eyes forward. We're sitting in the right seats. But to them, the issue isn't where we're sitting. It's what we look like while sitting here. At 4 a.m., the alarm rang inside a quiet Southwestern-style home nestled in the suburbs of Scottsdale. Serena Thompson had already been awake for 10 minutes. The soft glow from her desk lamp lit up a nearly 400-page document marked with yellow Post-its. One hand typed emails on her laptop, while the other held a cup of black tea. The final meeting to close a $1.2 billion acquisition deal for Skyport's passenger flow control system was scheduled for 10 a.m. But her mind wasn't fully on that. Her eyes kept glancing toward the bedroom door, where her twin daughters were still sleeping. Ayana and Amari, who had just turned 17 3 weeks ago, were about to take their first long-haul flight without their mother. Not because she didn't want to go, but because she needed them to walk on their own, just as she had once done, into a world where every open door came with silent doubts and invisible checks. At 4:13 a.m., Serena knocked softly on her daughter's door. Time to get up, she said gently but clearly. A second later, there was rustling inside. Ayana sat up first, her tightly braided hair still imprinted with pillow marks, but her eyes were already alert. I'm up, Mom. Amari pulled the blanket off her face, voice sleepy but soft. 5 more minutes. Serena didn't reply. She knew 5 minutes with Amari could easily stretch into 10 or 15 if left unchecked. But today she chose silence. Today they had to manage themselves. 15 minutes later, both girls were in the kitchen wearing simple gray hoodies, jeans, and white sneakers. Amari twirled her inhaler in her hands like a calming totem. Ayana checked her phone, watch, and wallet 3 times. Serena handed each of them a small snack box containing roasted almonds, a protein bar, and a pouch of organic juice. Eat this, she said plainly. You won't find anything healthy at the airport. Thanks, Mom, Amari said, though she didn't open the bag. You know what? Ayana added. I think we can handle everything. I mean, we've flown alone before. Serena placed her hand on the table. Do you remember the first time I flew alone? Ayana shook her head. No. 17 years old. Flying from Jackson, Mississippi to Atlanta for a scholarship interview. I had no phone, no AirPods, no digital ticket, and the check-in agent asked me 3 times if I was sure the name on the ticket was mine. Why would they ask that? Amari cut in. Because I didn't look like someone who had a scholarship, Serena said plainly. And at that time, a young black girl with a worn-out suitcase was not the image people expected at the check-in counter. I learned that day that sometimes you do nothing wrong, and yet the world will make you feel guilty just for existing in a space they believe you don't belong in. Ayana stayed quiet. It wasn't a new story, but it felt heavier today. Serena stood, slipped on her blazer. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you to prepare you. Remember this. Stay calm. Always keep your ticket and ID ready. If anything happens, don't argue. Document it. Text me. Or if you can't, send a signal. She pointed to the Apple Watch on their wrists. Both nodded. Serena hugged them one by one, longer than usual. At 6:10 a.m., the black SUV driven by their private chauffeur pulled up at the gate. The driver opened the rear door for the girls. They climbed in, shut the door, and set off. Serena watched from the window. She didn't wave, but inside she was praying, just for one simple thing, for everything to go normally. But she knew that normal for her daughters didn't look like it did for everyone else. At Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, the crowd had begun to swell. The driver pushed their luggage to the priority lane. Amari checked her phone for the fourth time. Ayana adjusted her backpack on her left shoulder, eyes scanning instinctively. "We'll be fine," she whispered. "I know," Amari replied, but her tone lacked conviction. After clearing security, they reached the Orion Air Premium check-in counter, where a blonde woman in a Navy uniform was typing on a computer. Ayana stepped forward, opened the app, and held out her phone. The woman glanced at it, then looked up at the girls. "This is the first-class check-in counter," she said, not loudly, but just enough for the person nearby to hear. "Yes, we know," Ayana replied calmly. "We have first-class tickets." The woman scanned the QR code, then looked back at her screen. A second of silence, then a nod. "All right, proceed to gate 12A. No smile, no greeting, just a cold confirmation and a gaze that hadn't fully retracted its initial doubt. Ayana and Amari said nothing. They pulled their suitcases forward, but both felt like they had just passed a test no one had announced, but always existed. At the first-class lounge, they scanned their tickets again. The attendant responded similarly. A quick glance, an extra moment of verification, then a greeting that felt somewhat forced. They sat down in a quiet corner where people sipped espresso, flipped through financial papers, or tapped away at laptops. No one spoke to them. No one asked if they needed anything, but glances were there, subtle, passing, like cold pins brushing skin. Amari opened the snack bag. "What do you think they're saying in their heads?" Ayana shrugged. "They don't need to say it. The way they look is enough." "You mean they think we don't deserve to be here?" "Number. They think we're unfamiliar to this space." They fell silent for a moment. Ayana texted, "In the lounge." "All good," Serena replied instantly. "Good. Keep your ID ready at boarding." When boarding was called, the sisters headed to gate 12A. First-class passengers were called first. The gate agent looked at their tickets, gave a brief nod, no smile. "You may board now." They entered the jet bridge leading directly to the waiting Boeing 787. The air inside was cool, the lighting soft and white. They stepped into the first-class cabin, which had only 8 rows, each with 4 wide seats. Ayana placed her backpack in the overhead bin. Amari followed. Seats 2A and 2B, second row, window and aisle. They sat down, buckled in, and prepared for the 3-hour flight to Charlotte. This trip was to attend a ceremony honoring their grandmother, a retired elementary school teacher who had taught for nearly 40 years in a small South Carolina town. It wasn't just a family reunion, but also their first time returning to the place where their mother was born and rose above every barrier to become the woman now leading the nation's aviation infrastructure industry. Amari leaned back, eyes closed. Ayana opened her phone and rechecked her messages. Neither of them knew that in just 10 minutes, they would be thrust into a test of everything their mother had ever warned them about, and her words would echo like prophecy. And the first shadow of prejudice had just stepped aboard the plane. Footsteps echoed on the polished wooden floor of the first-class cabin as a tall, middle-aged man in a navy suit entered from the boarding door. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed to the side, his black leather shoes gleaming, a sleek business briefcase slung over one shoulder. His eyes scanned the rows of seats, stopping at 2A and 2B. His face tightened as if he'd just spotted a design flaw in a luxury apartment. Without a word of greeting, he walked directly toward Ayana and Amari, stopped in front of their seats and said in a firm voice loud enough for the row behind to hear, "Excuse me, but you're in the wrong seats. These are mine." Ayana looked up from her headphones, which hadn't yet been turned on, and her eyes locked on the confident face in front of her. "I don't think so, sir. These are seats 2A and 2B. That's what our tickets say. The man shook his head. No way. I book these seats every time I fly this route. There's clearly a system error. Ayana opened her boarding app and held out her phone. I can show you our tickets if you'd like. He didn't look. His eyes shifted from Ayana to Amari, then flicked toward the overhead bin as if inspecting whether something was out of place. Then he turned toward the front of the cabin and raised his hand to call a flight attendant. Emily Briggs appeared after just a few steps, her expression stern, eyes already locked onto the situation. What seems to be the issue? The man jumped in before she could finish the question. These two are sitting in my seats. I'm a platinum executive member. I booked these two seats 2 weeks ago. Emily turned to the two girls, trying to keep her tone neutral, but unable to hide the subtle shift in eagerness when speaking to a passenger like him. May I see your tickets, please? For the second time in under 5 minutes, Ayana held out her phone and opened the boarding pass, showing their names and seat numbers clearly. Emily stared at the screen as if checking immigration papers, scrolling slowly through the information, then looking back at the two of them. I'll call the supervisor to verify. There might be an error in the seat assignment system. I don't think there's an error, Ayana replied, her voice still composed. The tickets clearly say 2A and 2B, and we checked in properly. Emily didn't respond. She turned away and reached for the radio clipped to her shoulder to call ground support. In the first-class cabin, the air began to feel heavier. Some passengers pretended not to notice. Others had already begun to glance over, waiting for a spectacle. An elderly man in the row ahead peeked over, then returned to his Wall Street Journal. A blonde woman 2 rows up tilted her head, then gave a faint smirk to her companion. The feeling was unmistakable. The entire cabin was watching them, not because of their presence, but because of the supposed inconvenience they were now being blamed for. 5 minutes later, another man entered the cabin, wearing a white shirt with the Orion Air logo and a name tag, Alan Norris, flight supervisor. He approached quickly, holding a tablet in hand. Emily gestured toward the two girls. They insist these are their seats, but Mr. Langford is a top-tier member and always sits here. Norris nodded at Langford, then turned to Ayana and Amari. Sorry, but I'll need to check your tickets again. This was the third time Ayana had to present her phone in under 15 minutes. Norris stared at the screen, eyes pausing on the names and seat numbers, then looked back at the girls as if trying to spot something that didn't fit. E-tickets, correct? He asked. Yes, sir. Booked through the official app. Paid with a personal credit card, Amari answered. And we entered through the first-class gate, checked in properly, and are sitting in the correct seats. Norris nodded slightly, but his eyes still carried a trace of doubt. He didn't say anything further and turned to Langford. Sir, could I see your ticket, please? Langford frowned as if the request itself was insulting. I told you, I always sit here. The flight attendant knows that. I don't keep my ticket because I've never needed to prove this before. We've still got our tickets, Ayana interjected, and we've shown them 3 times already. Norris remained silent for a moment, then turned back to Emily. I'll handle this. Please return to your duties. Emily nodded and briskly walked down the aisle, but not without glancing back at them, still sitting upright, eyes locked on the supervisor. Norris stood quietly in front of them for a few seconds, as if waiting for them to change their minds. When they didn't, he said, We'll review the system. But in the meantime, it's best if you stand up and let Mr. Langford sit temporarily. We'll sort everything out after takeoff. I'm sorry, sir, but we don't agree to that. These are our seats. We're not causing a disturbance, not yelling, just sitting in the places assigned to us, Ayana responded, her tone still calm but firm. Whether or not Mr. Langford frequently sits here doesn't change the fact that his name isn't on the ticket today. A heavy silence fell. Norris gripped the strap of his tablet, his eyes scanning the cabin, where at least 5 passengers were now closely observing. One person had started recording with a phone. Norris turned away and pulled out his radio again. I need 2 security officers to board at Gate 1A. We have a situation with non-compliant passengers. Amari's breathing quickened. Her hands trembled slightly. Ayana held her sister's hand beneath the seat. It's okay, she whispered. Stay calm. You didn't do anything wrong. Amari nodded, but her eyes were beginning to well up. They didn't scream. They didn't cause a scene. They just sat where they had paid to sit. And from the very first moment, every glance, every decision, Every ounce of suspicion had not been directed at the man who had just arrived without a ticket in hand, but solely at two young black girls with valid documentation, impeccable behavior, and the wrong skin tone. The radio crackled for the third time in under 10 minutes. Alan Norris, the flight supervisor for Orion Air, stood just one step away from seats 2A and 2B, gripping his tablet, his voice no longer as composed as before. The situation is delaying boarding. I need immediate support from airport security at Gate 12. Incident code, passenger refusal to comply with crew instructions. The moment those words left his mouth, Amari felt as if an invisible guillotine had dropped midair. I can't breathe, she whispered into her sister's ear, hands squeezing Ayana's wrist tightly. Ayana turned to her, eyes filled with worry. Stay calm. Breathe deeply. Imari nodded, but her breaths grew more rapid. From the beginning, they hadn't raised their voices, hadn't argued with anyone. All they had done was sit quietly in the seats they had purchased. But their silence and logic had done nothing to stop the spiral they were now caught in. 5 minutes later, two men in dark blue security uniforms boarded the plane. Each had a personal radio on their shoulder, utility belts holding pouches, zip ties, and tasers. One of them, tall with a buzz cut, wore a name tag that read Brennan. The other, younger, wore glasses and was labeled Taggart. Brennan stepped forward first, his eyes briefly passing over Alan Norris before locking onto the two girls. What's the situation? Norris gestured toward Ayana and Amari. They're refusing to vacate seats that were reserved by another passenger. We need their cooperation to depart on time. Ayana looked up. We're not refusing to cooperate. We're sitting in the seats we reserved and paid for. Brennan stepped closer. May I see your ticket? Here it is, Ayana said, holding out her phone for the fourth time. Brennan looked at the screen for a few seconds, then said nothing. No confirmation, no apology. Just a robotic nod before turning to Taggart. Get ready. Wait, Amari cried. We're not causing any trouble. We're just in our seats. Brennan said nothing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a zip tie, raising it as a warning. I'm asking you to stand up right now, or we'll be forced to use restraint. This is unnecessary force, Ayana replied, her voice still controlled, but beginning to tremble. We're legitimate passengers. What right do you have to put your hands on me when I've broken no law? You're obstructing crew directives, Brennan said coldly. That's a federal offense. I'm calling my mom, Ayana said, reaching into her pocket for her phone. But Brennan stepped forward and grabbed her wrist. I need you to stop moving. And then everything shattered. Amari's scream came first as she saw her sister being pulled from her seat. Let go of my sister. She's not resisting. Brennan yanked Ayana's arms behind her back and secured the zip tie aggressively, making her cry out in pain. A few passengers rose from their seats, eyes wide. One person shakily pulled out a phone to record. A woman whispered to her companion, They're minors. Is this how you treat minors? But no one intervened. Not a single person. Taggart moved to grab Amari. My sister has anxiety. Don't touch her, Ayana shouted. But Brennan held her tightly, dragging her from the seat like a sack of luggage. Amari tried to stand, but her legs shook. Taggart grabbed her arm and forced her down, bending her arms behind her. Stop! I didn't do anything wrong, she yelled. My inhaler! It's in my bag. I can't breathe. Chaos erupted across the cabin. Passengers could no longer pretend they didn't see. Some were filming, others whispering their disapproval. A woman in a white blouse stood from a nearby row. I'm a doctor, she said loudly. That girl is having a panic attack. She needs medical assistance, not handcuffs. Emily Briggs stepped forward, her tone icy. Ma'am, please return to your seat. Do not interfere with security protocol. Security protocol doesn't involve dragging unarmed minors from their seats when they have valid tickets, the doctor said. If you remain standing, I will notify security that you are also being disruptive, Emily responded without a hint of emotion. Meanwhile, Brennan dragged Ayana out into the aisle, forcing her to the floor. The zip tie cut into her skin, her face pale. Amari was pulled behind her, tripping over her backpack and falling to her knees. Her knee slammed into the floor. Brennan didn't stop. You refuse to cooperate. Now deal with the consequences, he barked as if declaring his authority. We're recording this, a passenger said from behind, voice shaking with anger. Brennan turned and looked at them, eyes cold. "Keep recording. Just don't obstruct my duty." "She needs her inhaler," Amari whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's in my bag." "Too late," Taggart replied, hoisting her up and restraining her. Brennan shoved Ayanna toward the airplane door. Amari stumbled behind. As they were dragged through the economy cabin, whispers erupted. A black man sitting in the first row gave them a quiet nod, as if sending silent solidarity. A middle-aged white woman shook her head and looked away. A girl, maybe 10 years old, asked her mother, "What did they do wrong?" The mother whispered, "Be quiet, honey." Nearing the airplane door, Ayanna collapsed. "My sister can't breathe," she shouted. "Please don't do this. She needs her medication." Brennan ignored her. "This is the price of ignoring crew instructions." Taggart dragged Amari from the floor, her face flushed, her breathing rapid. "We need medical personnel." The doctor from earlier had followed them to the jet bridge, shouting, "If you continue using force, I will report this in full detail." Brennan turned to her. "You're a passenger, not their physician. You're not authorized to make a diagnosis without being requested." And then the aircraft door shut. Ayanna and Amari were removed from the cabin, wrists bound behind their backs, walking past a long row of passengers, some filming with phones, others turning away, others staring in silence. Outside, the sky remained bright, but inside the hearts of the two girls, it felt as if the world had just been ripped in half. At the main hall of the Skybridge Conference Center in Atlanta, floor-to-ceiling glass walls reflected the morning sunlight with a sense of quiet pride. The grand atrium on the 17th floor, where the ceremony was underway, was decorated simply but with unmistakable authority. No red carpet, no golden statues, just the unified logos of two giants, NextRise Ventures and Orion Infrastructure Partners, etched side by side on a pristine white backdrop, as if declaring a historic alignment. Serena Thompson stood at the center of the stage, dressed in a sharp black suit adorned with a silver wing pin, the emblem of the founding architects of the U.S. Civil Air Traffic System. Every eye was fixed on her. Every light had been calibrated to honor her, but she paid none of it any mind. Serena had never cared to bask in the perks of reputation. She stood there not to be celebrated, but to mark a strategic promise, to build safer, smarter, and more equitable airports for the next generation. And just as she prepared to speak, her handbag buzzed softly. Not a flicker crossed her face. Serena lowered her eyes and glanced at the screen. A message from her chief assistant, Haley. Urgent. Video of Ayanna and Amari. Private link. She tapped it open. The video began with shaky footage, someone filming from economy class with a phone, clear image, labored breathing in the background. Then, the frame jolted as Ayanna was pulled from her seat, wrists zip-tied, face pale. Amari's weak voice came from behind, then the sound of scuffling. A woman shouted that she was a doctor. A flight attendant commanded everyone to sit down. And finally a muffled sob as the two girls were dragged off the plane. Serena stood completely still. In less than 30 seconds, the video ended. A silent rupture opened between her chest and the space around her. She didn't lift her hand, didn't breathe harder, didn't blink. No one in the auditorium noticed anything out of the ordinary, except the light in her eyes, which had just dimmed slightly. "Are we ready?" a member of the organizing team asked gently at her side. Serena gave a slight nod, then stepped up to the mic. "Before I speak about the future, I need to pause and reflect on the present," she said. "A present where, as we stand here discussing inclusivity and equality in aviation, my children have just been pulled from their airplane seats because of their skin color." A small murmur rippled through the crowd, but Serena didn't stop. "I don't care how many contracts were signed today. I don't care how much we plan to invest in next-gen air traffic systems. If an airline still believes that two black girls in first class are a mistake that needs to be corrected with zip ties, then we've failed from the foundation." She looked directly at the front row, where Orion Air's CEO sat frozen. "Mr. Craig Whitmore," she said clearly, "you have 2 hours to explain this to me, or we pull the entire deal." A terrible silence swept through the hall. No one dared cough, not a single clap, only wide eyes and phones quietly recording, live streaming, capturing audio, knowing they had just witnessed an earthquake. Serena turned her back to the stage, not looking at anyone, not collecting documents, not needing a guide. She was used to opening her own doors, even when the world tried to slam them shut. In the armored SUV waiting outside, Serena got in, closed the door, and issued her commands crisply. Contact the entire legal department, assemble the crisis team, call every major shareholder of Orion Air. I want a full internal operations report and names of all personnel responsible for flight staffing. Haley, seated in the front, didn't dare ask a thing, but Serena looked up at the rearview mirror and added, her voice revealing the first trace of emotion, Ayana appears to be injured, and Amari, that baby couldn't breathe. They texted me in time, but the system is always slower than the human heart. The vehicle pulled away from the complex, rolling past the cluster of journalists now starting to appear near the entrance. News was spreading like wildfire. Within just 20 minutes of Serena leaving the signing ceremony, the video was already on Twitter under the hashtag they were kicked off first class. Alongside it were stills from the video. Ayana being yanked from her seat, wrist bound, head down, while Amari slumped over as if she could no longer breathe. One tweet came from prominent black journalist Jaden Reeves. If this is how America treats the daughter of a woman who built our airports, imagine what it does to our daughters. Serena issued no response to any of the comments. She didn't need to. Her next move had already been scheduled. A closed-door meeting on the 36th floor of NextRise Ventures headquarters with the full crisis legal team, communications director, investment advisors, and a representative from the Office of Corporate Ethics. Serena placed two printed stills from the video on the table, one of Ayana zip-tied, one of Amari flushed red and gasping. This is not emotion, she said. This is evidence. We will use this to force a systemic correction. I don't need an apology. I need guarantees. Someone at the table asked quietly, so, are we canceling the contract? Serena shook her head. Not yet. We pause. But I want to be at Phoenix Airport within 4 hours. Schedule meetings with the Orion CEO, their head of HR, the flight route supervisor, and a federal rep from the FAA. No one objected. The scene shift was no longer just a plot twist in her personal narrative. It was now a pivot point for an entire industry. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the room, a NextRise internal staffer was editing the draft press release. The first proposed headline read, CEO Serena Thompson, my daughters were yanked from their seats and America needs to listen. But Serena signaled, remove it. Don't make me the angry mother. They'll weaponize that. She requested a new title. CEO Serena Thompson demands aviation reform following incident threatening minor passengers. Quiet, firm, no shouting. Just the truth. Serena Thompson's private jet landed at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport at 2:47 p.m., just 7 hours after the incident. There were no reporters, no flashy entourage, only a charcoal gray SUV waiting discreetly at the tarmac, windows blacked out, ready to take her. But this time, Serena wasn't alone. Beside her sat Haley, her assistant of over 10 years, and behind them were two senior legal counsels from the NextRise legal team, George Latimer and Rochelle Shin. Both knew every clause in the contract between NextRise and Orion Air by heart, and exactly which legal loopholes could turn a hollow apology into a binding obligation to restructure an entire system. Serena didn't speak much during the ride from the airport to Orion's temporary Phoenix headquarters. She wore headphones, listening to a voice memo Amari had sent from her smartwatch while being dragged off the plane. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just sitting in my seat. The girl's voice trembled, cracked, as if trying to convince herself not to cry, but failing entirely. Serena didn't cry, but something in her gaze shifted. It was no longer the gaze of an executive. It was the gaze of a mother who had once fought against an entire system just to make sure her children had the right to sit still in a seat they had lawfully paid for. Inside the 12th floor meeting room at Orion, CEO Craig Whitmore was already present, along with head of HR Dolores Zhang, Western Regional Operations Supervisor Alan Norris, and head of flight crew management Charlotte Diaz. The air in the room was icy cold, as though the thermostat had been set to freezing. Craig stood up and greeted Serena with a strained smile. Thank you for coming. I understand this is a serious matter. Serena didn't shake his hand. She gave a curt nod. We're not here to share feelings. I want the truth, and I want it fast, clear, and without any sentence that starts with, I assumed. Dolores pulled out a file. Alan flipped through flight reports. Charlotte stared down at her iPad notes. But they all knew. There were no words sufficient to justify what had happened. They had allowed a flight attendant to misinterpret, a passenger to commandeer, and when two black girls responded by following procedure, they were dragged out like criminals in full view of the cabin. Serena asked one question. Who authorized the use of zip ties? No one answered. A minute of silence passed. Then Charlotte spoke. That's standard protocol in emergency situations involving non-compliant passengers. Serena looked at her. So two 16-year-old girls, unarmed, non-violent, asking for a reason, are considered an emergency threat. Craig cut in. It may have been a field judgment error from the supervisor. We're conducting an internal investigation. Serena didn't even raise an eyebrow. How long will that take? And in the meantime, who's responsible for compensating the psychological trauma, dignity, and reputation damage inflicted on two minors? George Latimer activated the projector. A security camera video appeared on screen, unedited. Ayanna being pulled from her seat. Amari trying to stand, being held down. A woman's voice from the cabin yelling clearly, "They didn't do anything. Those are their seats." Craig bowed his head. Serena continued, I demand the following. 1. Immediate suspension of the entire flight crew involved within 72 hours. 2. A formal public apology letter from the CEO of Orion addressed to Ayanna and Amari. 3. Launch of a reform program for internal response procedures when minors are falsely accused on board. Craig was sweating. We need time to review. This is a complex communications issue. Serena remained motionless. I'll give you time, she said. Exactly 24 hours. After that, I'll hold a press conference of my own. And I promise you, if the truth isn't made clear, Orion's $1.2 billion contract with NextRise will be renegotiated, publicly and transparently. The meeting ended in silence. Serena left the room without looking back. In the car, she pulled out her phone. Ayanna was calling. Mom, I'm okay. Amari's asleep now. The doctor said it was an acute panic attack, but I'm scared. Serena didn't say, I'm scared too. She simply replied, I'm handling it. And I promise this won't happen again. Not to you, not to anyone. That same evening, Serena authorized the release of the first press statement. No outrage, no blame, just the truth. And a single quote from her, justice doesn't live in TV shouting matches. It lives in systems that let you be heard without needing to scream. The next day, 4 major newspapers ran the headline on their front pages. CEO Serena Thompson demands systemic reform after daughters removed from first-class seats. At Orion offices, internal emails began circulating. Some employees anonymously contacted NextRise, reporting similar past incidents, never addressed. Serena approved the launch of a confidential response mailbox for aviation staff across the U.S. Within 3 days, over 430 reports were filed. Meanwhile, the hashtag number "They Deserve Better" surged again. But this time, instead of anger, it carried a video message from Ayanna. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know, for the first time, people are listening. On the third morning after the incident, a 56-second video surfaced on Twitter and TikTok with the title, If These Were Your Daughters, What Would You Do? The footage was a compilation of passenger-shot clips showing the 2 girls being dragged from their first-class seats, overlaid with subtitles. They had boarding passes. They had manners. But they didn't have the right skin tone. The first to share it was Luna Marcel, a model and social justice advocate with 3.4 million followers. Within 2 hours, the video had surpassed 8 million views and was shared hundreds of thousands of times. The hashtag number, they were kicked off. First class climbed into the national top 3 trending topics. By noon, CNN, NBC, and The Guardian all issued breaking news alerts. Orion Air under fire as viral video shows 2 black teens zip-tied and removed from first class. Headlines no longer referred to it as an incident or a misunderstanding. The language had shifted to human rights violation, passenger abuse, institutionalized racial bias. Most notable was a national NPR interview with an eyewitness named Madison Reeve, a white woman who had been seated next to the two girls during the event. "I've never seen anything that horrible on a flight," she said. "They were polite, soft-spoken. They were checked 3 times while the white man who took their seats wasn't touched. And when they responded, very calmly, they were dragged out like terrorists. I don't know who they are, but I know they didn't deserve that." Meanwhile, at Orion Air headquarters, the entire communications team was thrown into crisis mode. In a top-tier internal group chat, PR Director Jake Mendelson typed, "If we don't act in the next 24 hours, we're going to lose all market trust." CEO Craig Whitmore attempted to prevent a press conference from Serena Thompson by sending a private proposal. "We want to handle the matter through a closed channel to avoid escalation." Serena responded with just one line. "The issue is not optics. It's that the truth is now too obvious to deny." Journalists began digging deeper. They uncovered other past incidents involving Orion Air over the last 5 years. An Asian passenger denied service for not speaking clear English, a Muslim woman forced to remove her headscarf for security, and most recently, a 9-year-old black boy barred from boarding because the name on the ticket didn't match his birth certificate, even though his mother had purchased the ticket using his legal name. All of it had been swept under the rug internally, but now it was dragged into daylight. That day, the Washington Post published a special feature titled, "From Skies to Silence: How Airline Discrimination Became Normalized." In it, the names Ayanna and Amari Thompson were not presented as faceless victims, but as the spark of a fire that could no longer be smothered. At NextRise headquarters, Serena convened the Strategic Media Advisory Team. The question was no longer, should we respond, but how do we respond without becoming noise in a room full of shouting? Serena decided against TV appearances. She requested a small town hall, live-streamed, uncut, no host, no production. Just her and 2 empty chairs, one for Ayanna, one for Amari, though neither would attend, still undergoing trauma counseling. Serena sat alone. The camera captured a single angle. No lights, no music. She spoke slowly, each word crisp and deliberate. "If you ask how I felt watching my daughters being pulled from their first-class seats just because their skin wasn't white, I'll tell you the truth. I didn't feel angry. I felt awake. Because I know this didn't just happen today. It happens every day. To kids whose mothers aren't CEOs, who don't have lawyers, who don't have footage." She paused. "I don't want my daughters to be symbols. I want them to be a turning point, a change, in policy, in behavior, and most importantly, in how we look at each other on a plane." The 11-minute video was broadcast across all NextRise social channels, garnering over 40 million views in 24 hours. The tone of comments shifted. Rage gave way to admiration, anger to support. Related hashtags began to emerge. #FlyEqual, #Seat is not a skin, #Justice for Ayanna and Amari. A high school teacher in Denver assigned Serena's speech in an ethics class. A famous rapper released a track titled "Boarding Passes and Boundaries" based on the incident. Several universities began demanding Orion Air present updated diversity policies before renewing student travel contracts. Most notably, 3 major rival airlines, Vega Air, Horizon Blue, and Newskis, announced they would sponsor free flights for high-achieving students of color over the coming year, in a move to demonstrate fairness and transparency. The media was no longer just reporting, they were becoming part of the movement. CNN aired a talk show titled, "Should Airline Crews Be Retrained on Implicit Bias?" Vox published a video essay comparing how flight attendants treat white and non-white passengers. Netflix announced a new documentary titled "The Seat They Lost," chronicling the incident, with the Thompson family's approval. Serena declined all commercial media projects, but she agreed to one thing: the creation of the Altitude Fund, a legal and media assistance foundation for underrepresented passengers involved in airline-related discrimination. By day 10 after the incident, for the first time in history, the FAA issued a formal statement. It would begin reviewing all domestic airline policies involving minors, minorities, and women. Orion Air was forced to hold an internal hearing, suspend 4 employees, and launch a new initiative called First Class for All, a pledge against bias in premium seating practices. But it wasn't over, because Serena remained silent in shareholder negotiations. She had yet to declare whether she would maintain or terminate the contract with Orion, and the entire market was holding its breath. There was no elevated stage, no spotlight, no backdrop banners, no dramatic soundtrack. The press conference took place in a modest conference room inside Rivera Hall, a space once used as a refugee shelter in 2021. That was Serena's choice, not due to lack of resources, but because she fully understood where a message should come from. Truth doesn't need decoration. It was the 14th day since Amari and Ayanna were forcibly removed from their first-class seats. And it was also the day Serena Thompson, founder of NextRise, mother of the 2 girls, and the woman the media had dubbed the quiet symbol of justice, finally chose to speak publicly to the national press. The room had just 60 seats, reserved for respected journalists and representatives from civil rights organizations. At the front stood a simple wooden table. On it, a single microphone, a glass of water, and a thin stack of folders, neatly arranged in front of the only chair. There was no one standing beside her. Serena entered on time, dressed in a plain white shirt and black slacks. No one rose to greet her. No one offered their seat. But the atmosphere shifted the moment she walked in, not because of her appearance, but because of the stillness that arrived with her, as if truth had already been waiting in the room. She sat down, didn't adjust the microphone, didn't open the folder. Her gaze swept slowly across every face in the room. After 9 seconds, she spoke. This is not the first time someone has been pulled from an airplane seat because of their skin color, but this might be the first time that person has a mother who refused to stay silent. She paused. No one interrupted. No one questioned. Serena continued, her tone steady, without theatrics. I'm not here to vent. I'm not here to further anyone's shame. But there are things that can't be kept in private calls. There are questions that must be asked publicly, because they touch justice at a level no one is allowed to ignore. She opened the folder, pulled out a detailed report of every step taken since the incident, the exact time the girls were removed, who gave the order, who failed to intervene, how many reports were falsified, and even a copy of an internal memo edited from passenger compliant to displayed signs of aggression. The room remained silent. Serena did not speak in an accusatory tone, but each document she placed on the table struck like a blow against a system long believed to be immovable. I don't believe my daughters were discriminated against out of hate, she said. I believe it happened because people are used to believing no one will ask questions. A hand went up. A CBS reporter named Marcus asked, Ms. Thompson, are you planning to sue Orion Air? Serena looked directly at him. I'm not suing for money. I'm waiting for structural action. I've given time, documents, and proof. If in 30 days there is no change, then the courtroom is not a choice. It's a duty. Another journalist asked, There are rumors you're planning to start your own airline? Serena smiled faintly. Rumors are for those who believe them. My job is to redefine the standard. I don't want to monopolize the skies. I want to make sure that anyone who boards a plane knows their seat can't be taken just because they don't look like someone used to power. A young female reporter asked the final question. If you could say one thing to the person who dragged your daughters from their seats, what would it be? Serena was silent. Almost 20 seconds passed. Then she answered slowly, I don't need their apology. I need their understanding that my silence wasn't acceptance. It was a warning. And from that day forward, anyone who does this to another child will have to face the light. The press conference ended with no applause. Serena did not walk through the crowd. She exited through a side door. No security, no assistant. But that evening, international news agencies ran the story. CNN called it one of the calmest yet most impactful press conferences of the decade. Vox described, Serena didn't say much, but every word was crafted like a weapon to shatter indifference. Time magazine featured her on the cover with just one headline. She never raised her voice, but she made the nation listen. Meanwhile, at Orion Air, Craig Whitmore found himself increasingly isolated on the executive board. Half the directors called for his temporary resignation, to avoid obstructing the reform process. Simultaneously, flight crew staff filed petitions demanding union representation in all sensitive passenger handling protocols, particularly involving minors or members of marginalized communities. The FAA formally issued a written mandate requiring Orion to submit a revised internal policy commitment within 21 days. At NextRise, dozens of emails poured in from parents across the country thanking Serena. One wrote, "I've never known anyone who stood up for kids like mine. Thank you for not being silent." An 11-year-old girl submitted a video of herself practicing Serena's speech in front of a mirror. Artists began organizing a concert called Seat for Justice, a benefit to support aviation equity policy. Several regional airlines simultaneously announced plans to retrain their entire staff on unconscious bias and non-discriminatory passenger response. But Serena didn't attend the events. She declined an invitation to appear as a featured guest on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, declined a TED Talk, declined participation in a civil rights awareness campaign. She posted only one message from the official NextRise account. When people truly change, you don't need to stand center stage. You only need to stand in the aftermath and not walk away. Day 29. Less than 24 hours remained before the deadline Serena had set for Orion at the press conference. There had been no internal meeting held on Orion's side, no official statement, no procedural update, no report delivered to NextRise. Serena sat before the large digital screen in her New York office, her hand resting on the trackpad, her gaze sharp as a blade poised for its final descent. On the screen was the $1.2 billion contract with Orion Air, the largest partnership ever between an AI-powered airport management system and a national airline. Her finger hovered over the icon labeled Terminate Partnership. Before she clicked, she asked, "Any response from them?" Rochelle, the lead attorney, shook her head. "We called 3 times. Their legal team said they needed more time to assess the feasibility of implementing organizational culture adjustments." Serena said nothing. Click. The entire contract was officially canceled. An email was sent to 38 legal contacts, 4 news agencies, and the NextRise financial operations team simultaneously. A dedicated public webpage went live titled, "Why NextRise Terminated Its Partnership with Orion." It listed all reasons: 11 contractual violations, 3 unanswered reform requests, and most notably, Orion's decision to retain all staff members from the incident flight. No suspensions, no independent investigation. Less than an hour later, Serena walked into another meeting room, this one on the 26th floor of NextRise headquarters. Waiting for her were 2 people: the CEO of Ether Air, a rising tech airline in the domestic market, and a senior ethics advisor who had formerly served at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Serena didn't make small talk. "I need a partner who doesn't just arrive on time, but knows when to stop and listen." The young CEO of Ether Air replied, "We've seen the entire video. If you want us to retrain all staff with a racial bias curriculum, we'll do it. If you want NextRise's customer response system deeply integrated, we'll authorize it. And if you want us to publicly sign an ethics commitment, we'll be the first airline to do so." Serena nodded. "I'll sign, but I'll demand as well." She placed a file on the table, a proposal for the Horizon Pact, the Sky Ethics Agreement, which required 1. Establishing an industry-wide anonymous reporting platform for discriminatory conduct, 2. Mandatory periodic training on implicit bias awareness for all flight crew, 3. Creating an independent aviation ethics council with representatives from impacted communities, and 4. Publishing biannual ethics violation reports. The CEO glanced through it and signed, without hesitation, without negotiation. That same day, NextRise officially announced the full transfer of its AI airport management system and licensing rights to Ether Air. The projected 5-year value, $1.8 billion, surpassing the previous Orion deal. But the shockwave wasn't about the money. It was in the press release that followed. Serena wrote, "We are not switching partners. We are redefining standards. The sky is not a place to relearn the meaning of dignity. It is where that lesson should begin." Simultaneously, Serena sent a private email to Craig Whitmore, CEO of Orion. One line only: "I waited, and you chose silence." Craig didn't respond, But soon after, leaked emails from Orion's board surfaced, demanding his resignation within 10 days if a detailed reform plan could not be produced. An anonymous executive told Reuters, "We didn't lose a contract. We lost trust, the hardest currency to earn back." Across social media, the twist was branded the quietest drop ever, a silent move that shook an entire corporation. A short animation circulated, showing a woman's hand pressing the terminate button, overlaid with Ayana's voice. "They thought my mother would forgive, but my mother never chooses silence in exchange for an empty nod." The hashtag number sign, terminate and transform, hit #1 on Twitter for 3 hours. More than 20 other startup founders pledged to sign the Horizon Pact, even if they weren't in aviation. At NextRise, a new digital board was installed in the main lobby. On it was a message from Serena to all employees. "We don't just invent solutions. We redefine what people thought was normal." Beside it stood an empty frame, where staff could handwrite one abnormal thing they'd once accepted out of fear of losing their place, then tear it up and drop it into a glass vault below. In the first week alone, the vault filled faster than the cloud storage system NextRise once prided itself on. Serena did not make any public statements in the days that followed, but she approved one project, a short Q&A clip featuring questions submitted by high school students. It spread like wildfire. One little girl asked, "Why didn't you forgive Orion?" Serena smiled gently. "Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to a table where your daughter was once left unfed." Another student asked, "But what if they change?" Serena replied, "Change is when they rise from the table, clean it fully, and invite us back, with a different heart. Not just for my daughters, but for every child who's ever been pushed to the back of the plane because they didn't fit someone's idea of what deserving looks like." Day 42 after the incident on Flight 318, Serena Thompson walked into the headquarters of Orion Air for the first time since she had unilaterally terminated the contract and signed with a competitor. The meeting had not been announced. No press, no assistant, no legal team. Just Serena, carrying a single printed document, a copy of the Horizon Pact she had proposed to Orion the month prior, left unanswered. Sitting across the table from her in the room was Craig Whitmore, still CEO despite rising internal and media pressure. Beside him were Dolores Zhang and a new advisor, a face not seen in any previous meetings. Craig stood up but didn't offer his hand. "I'm surprised to see you back." Serena didn't smile. "I'm not back. I'm here to end this." The room had no glass walls, no city view outside, just a large table with 2 chairs at either end. Serena pulled out a chair and sat down, placing the document in front of Craig. "I won't drag this out. I'm not here to request anything. I'm here to deliver a final condition, for you and for anyone who still wants Orion to survive." Craig crossed his arms. "We're already reworking internal protocols, rehiring emotional intelligence consultants for staff training, and entering dialogue with shareholders. If you're here to preach, I'm afraid that's no longer necessary." Serena lifted her eyes. "I'm not here to preach. I'm here to hand you a chance. Your last." She pointed to the first line of the document. "The Civilian Council for Oversight of Discriminatory Behavior in Aviation. An independent body, not under Orion or any airline, but with the authority to assess, speak out, and publicly report violations." Serena continued, "If you agree to sign this, the council will be formed within 30 days. If not, I will publicly call on investors, shareholders, and your biggest corporate clients to withdraw all cooperation within 72 hours. Craig gave a dry laugh. "You think you have that kind of power?" Serena met his eyes. "I don't need power. I just need them to look at how you used yours, and the cost the whole system paid for your silence." The air in the room began to tighten. Dolores looked like she wanted to speak, but Serena raised a hand, signaling her to stop. She placed her palm flat on the table and spoke each word with precision. "You weren't on that flight, but your team represented you, and they acted exactly as you taught them. There was no protocol saying 2 young black girls had to be dragged from their seats, but it was the silence, the ambiguity, and your allowance of flexible personal judgment that enabled it." Craig clenched his hands. "I admit there were mistakes, but I can't be held responsible for every individual employee's action." Serena shook her head. No one is asking you to own every action, but leadership means building a system where individual failures don't become collective disasters, and you failed to do that. That's why I'm here, to make sure this doesn't repeat itself anywhere else. Craig didn't respond. He looked down at the commitment, a few lines he had skimmed before, but never truly absorbed. Any action taken against passengers related to race, age, gender, or disability must be recorded, stored, and reviewed by an independent internal culture audit team. Craig frowned. If we implement this, dozens of incidents will be exposed. It will destroy the company's reputation. Serena replied without hesitation. Not implementing it is what will destroy you. A reputation is not built on concealment. It's built on the courage to make it right. A long silence followed. No one spoke. Serena stood up. I won't pressure you. I'll walk out of here in 10 minutes. If you want to retain even a shred of respect from the community, from those who once trusted you, this is your only chance. Craig looked at her, his gaze no longer sharp. It was the look of a man who finally had to admit his arrogance had no place in the new era of aviation. Serena left the room without looking back. She didn't need to know whether Craig signed then or not, because she knew what she had started no longer depended on one man signing a piece of paper. It had grown beyond any single individual. This fight from now on belonged to the public. The next day, a post appeared on Serena's LinkedIn page. No image, no hashtag, just a sentence. They told me you can't change how an industry operates. Today, I'm not trying to change an industry. I'm just defending a seat, so a black girl can sit there without needing to prove she deserves it. A short video clip from the announcement of the Independent Oversight Council was shared widely, showing Serena staring directly into the lens, then saying, "Justice is not a destination. It's a boundary, and I'm just here to defend that line." Day 47. Inside a closed-door conference room in the East Annex of Washington, D.C., among representatives from the aviation industry, civil rights attorneys, community oversight groups, and the Federal Secretary of Transportation, a meeting unlike any before was taking place. No press, no spokespersons, no social media. Only people who once stood on opposite sides, now forced to sit down together so as not to fall further into the spiral of broken public trust. Serena entered at exactly 9 a.m., not a minute late. In front of her was Craig Whitmore, no longer proud. He had arrived early, said little, and brought the final revised version of the Horizon Pact, now carrying provisional signatures from 4 other major airline CEOs. A silent admission: if they didn't follow through, the entire industry would be left behind. Serena opened the folder, flipping through page by page, examining each line. Clause 7. Who holds the authority to publicly disclose violations once they're found? Craig answered immediately. The Independent Counsel. No internal PR gatekeeping. Serena nodded. The discussion lasted over 3 hours, and no one left their seat, because no one dared repeat the mistake of silence from the previous weeks. Questions once dodged were now laid bare. How can a flight attendant speak up about a colleague's misconduct without fearing termination? How can passenger risk assessment policies avoid becoming masks for bias? And how can a 16-year-old black girl not have to pull out her phone to film for her own safety? By the end, a framework agreement was reached. The Aviation Ethics Council, officially named the Horizon Review Board, would be formed within 60 days. Participating airlines would appoint representatives, but would have no control over what the council monitors. The board would comprise 12 members, 6 from the public, 3 legal and sociological experts, and 3 independent technical advisors. All incidents related to discrimination, bias, or systemic prejudice would be reported quarterly. Each public report would include the full name of the accountable individual, no anonymity, and if an airline received 2 consecutive warnings, they would face a 30-day suspension of access to NextRise's AI coordination technology. When Craig moved to shake hands, Serena stepped half a pace back. I'll sign, but only if someone else signs first. She handed the pen to Ayanna, her daughter, who had been standing silently at her side from the beginning. The girl was no longer the zip-tied witness. Today, she was the voice for millions of passengers who had quietly endured. Ayanna signed in the lower left corner, next to the title, community advocate representative. She said nothing, but her gaze toward Mr. Whitmore made it clear to everyone. This time, there would be no unconditional forgiveness, only vigilance. The agreement was finalized at 12:57 p.m. Serena Rose folded the printed copy and said, "We don't need perfect airlines. We need people who can relearn moral lessons, even while flying at 30,000 feet." The very next day, the Horizon Pact was publicly released with 6 initial signatures. Most surprising of all, a Japanese international carrier, Sorajet, proactively requested to join the oversight system, despite not being under U.S. legal jurisdiction. They submitted a short video with subtitles, not because we're involved, but because we want to start being involved in the right thing. The hashtag right altitude right ethics quickly spread across Asia. In response, the European Transportation Alliance announced it would review a similar model. In the U.S., law schools, flight crew academies, and even AI healthcare tech companies began adapting Horizon Pact's structure as a reference for rebuilding ethics systems in service industries. Around that same time, Serena received an invitation from the White House to join the advisory panel for a new piece of legislation, the Dignity Clause. It would require all public service organizations to implement a clear, accountable, and public oversight mechanism against discriminatory behavior. But she declined any official role. "I don't need authority from the government. I just need to know that every time my daughter boards a plane, she isn't someone else's test of morality." Then in an unofficial ceremony, no live stream, no trumpets, Serena handed the first official copy of the Horizon Pact to Ayana. The girl held it in her hands, then turned to her mother and asked, "Do you think they'll really change in the end?" Serena looked at her daughter for a long moment, then answered, "Maybe not all of them. But if even one person stands up, others will start to see that silence is a choice. And refusing to stay silent, that's how change begins." 6 months after the signing of the Horizon Pact, William Harwood International Airport in Denver became the first testing ground for the immediate response system deployed by the Aviation Ethics Oversight Council, Horizon Review Board. At boarding gate 12B, a single walnut wood chair, unassuming yet clearly distinct from the rows of plastic seats surrounding it, was placed in the middle of the waiting area. No plaques, no celebrity names, no dedications, and yet everyone who passed by paused, because beneath the seat, a small line had been engraved. "This is the seat for those who were once pulled from their own, just because someone else didn't believe they deserved to sit there." Ayanna Thompson attended the event without giving a speech. She walked quietly among the crowd, standing behind the barrier, wearing a gray knit beanie, no guest badge, no VIP emblem. But as she approached the chair, all eyes recognized her. A few people instinctively reached for their phones, only to be stopped by a sign from the organizers. "No photography, no recording. This is a place for presence, not attention." Ayanna didn't sit down. She stood, gazed at the words, and gently placed an old airline ticket beneath the seat, the same ticket she and her sister had held on the day of the incident. It had been folded many times, the ink edges faded, but the words still read clearly, "First class, 2B." A middle-aged woman nearby began to cry. She didn't speak, just gently took Ayanna's hand and nodded. No dialogue was needed, no explanation, because that moment was a quiet confirmation. A memory that once caused pain had now become the starting point for a new ethical system. That same day, several airlines released their first reports on the implementation of the new policy. Orion Air, under close oversight from the Horizon Review Board, recorded 3 potential discrimination incidents addressed within 48 hours of discovery, something unheard of before. Sorajet in Japan established dignity feedback corridors at every airport they operated in, spaces where passengers could share experiences of how they were treated, without needing to enter a name or email. Other airlines began replicating the model. A human resources director at Atlantic Sky said on national television, "We used to think an apology was enough, but it turns out what the community needs is a system that can repair, not just a promise not to repeat." During this time, Serena Thompson continued declining all television interview invitations. She did not speak at conferences. She didn't accept medals. She joined no honorary councils. Instead, she returned to her company, Haven Tech, and quietly formed a development team named Chairs of Dignity, creating an internal employee scoring system based on humanity, not just performance. The system wasn't just used within her own company. It was offered for free to 27 other businesses across the United States, most of them minority-founded startups. Only once did she write a letter to all Haven Tech employees. We can measure a product by its revenue, but dignity has no metric. So we must build an environment where no one has to trade their worth just to be heard. On the exact 6-month anniversary of the incident, the Horizon Review Board released a digital infographic. One section read, "The rate of black passengers being reprimanded or asked to vacate their seats compared to white passengers has decreased by 47.2% this quarter. But this is not a victory, it is a reminder. Every statistic represents a person and a moment that cannot be undone." Ayana and her sister Layla later launched a community campaign called "You Belong in This Seat," aimed at collecting stories, testimonies, and memories from people who were once made to feel out of place in any setting. Restaurants, offices, classrooms, hospitals. They hosted small gatherings at public libraries, local coffee shops, and high schools. No cameras, no hashtags. But everyone who attended left with a small piece of paper that bore one single line. You don't have to prove you deserve the seat. They have to prove they are fair. One day while walking through New Orleans airport, Serena happened to witness a white flight attendant crouching down to help an elderly Arab passenger organize her bags. No one noticed. No camera was rolling. No special reason. But Serena paused. She said nothing. Just watched, then walked on. Because she knew, real change doesn't lie in loud declarations. It lies in the quiet, repeated acts done when no one is watching, when no one is required to be kind. And then, one June night, at a quiet airport gate where the wooden chair in Denver had once been placed, a little girl, about 10 years old, pulled her mother's hand and pointed at the words beneath the seat. "Mom, why does this chair have such a long name?" The mother knelt down, read the inscription, and stayed silent for a moment. Then she replied, "Because one day, someone pulled a girl out of her seat just because she didn't look like someone who belonged there." The girl asked, "And now?" The mother smiled. "Now, no one has the right to do that anymore." Perhaps the most frightening part wasn't that two young black girls were dragged out of their first-class seats simply because they didn't look like they belonged there. It was the silence around them, the averted gazes, the raised phones, the people watching without saying a word. But the miracle is this: silence can be broken, and dignity, once fiercely defended, can create new rules the world must relearn. The seat at the airport today may just be a symbol, but it stands for the millions who've been dismissed, sidelined, or told to step aside, just because of their skin, their background, or the way they didn't fit the system's expectations. And when one person has the courage to hold their ground, even when pulled away, insulted, or zip-tied, they don't just keep their seat. They open a space where others finally get to enter. If you've ever witnessed injustice, if you've ever been told you don't belong here, or if you've ever stayed silent because you felt too small to matter, remember this: sometimes an entire system begins to change from one small act that dares to say, "I'm still staying." What did this story mean to you? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because your words might be exactly what someone else needs to find their strength. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, where justice doesn't scream but still reaches the heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with someone you care about. Because who knows? The next time you take a seat somewhere, you might be the one who helps someone else feel you deserve to be here.